Top down, bottom up, and inside out. What does that even mean? This is the playbook of fundamental transformation. Top down, this is your government, and it's infiltrated by legal insurgents. They're voted into power. They're brought in by the administration. This is when the radicals become policymakers. So if this is your government, they're scattered all over, and they start coming down, okay? But it's not effective, at least enough, unless you have the second part, and that is the bottom up. These are the radicals that are pushing up. And who's squeezed in the middle? Well, you are. Makes a nice sandwich. Those aren't sesame seeds. Those are radicals that you intentionally put in there. You just didn't know. Radical policy always butts up against the Constitution. But when you have policies that are bearing down high taxes, immigration, any of the things that are going on, high crime, it's all done by the radicals that are not the bun. They look all the same and they don't answer to anybody. Who's doing this? Okay? That's pushing down on you. And then the activist at the right side, right time, they rise up and it becomes chaotic, turns the inside out, and everyone says the same exact thing. Somebody make it stop. We can't live like this anymore. That's when fundamental transformation is complete. You can look at this in many different revolutions. The one I have always looked at, because it's exactly this, is how the Soviets turned Czechoslovakia from a capitalist to communist country in 3 years in 1948. Remember, there was a treaty. The Soviet Union had to be invited in. It's kind of like Beetlejuice, I think. You have to invite them in. They can turn a country communist, but the USSR was not allowed to cross a border unless everything was upside down and the regime called them in. This is how they did it. They put a bunch of communists all in the top of the government, caused all kinds of chaos on the street. Then their useful idiots stood up and the people said, make it stop. The tanks were on the border, ready. And when the people said, make it stop, the communists at the top, the seeds on the bun, they were all like, we need help, Russia. And the USSR rolled across the border. A member of the Czechoslovakian Communist Party revealed the entire process in a memo called "And Not a Shot Fired." It describes the 3 key purposes for bottom-up's role, along with the new radicalized government. As I read these off, I want you to think about how the left has treated organizations like Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, and Antifa. Bottom up, I'm quoting. Systematically, bottom up, systematically supports the revolutionaries in the organs of power, enhances their strength, and makes up for numerical weakness. They realize, they know they're in the minority. That's why they're so afraid of you. They're in the minority, they know it. But for fundamental change to happen, they have to make it appear. What are those puffer fishes, right? Don't ever have them. They're very dangerous unless prepared by a very good chef in Japan, I hear. Anyway, what do? This is not attractive. They make themselves appear like I look like right now. Bigger. They have to do that. They have to convince the entire country that they have the will of the people. That they are the ones that are right and you are wrong. That's when constitutions are changed. Next, it has a direct effect on limiting the influence and positions of waverers and enemies standing in the path of future progress of the revolution. How many times have you heard them saying this? They're standing in the way of progress. So what does this actually mean? Intimidation. That's what it means. How many conservatives now feel scared to exercise their First Amendment rights? I just don't want to cause any more problems. I just want my kids to be okay in school. How many choose not to speak out over fear of retaliation from the Biden administration or the lackeys that are just blindly following in the streets? Then, third one, it awakens the forces of the people. It breaks through the onerous circle of intimidation and spiritual terror of the old institutions, the church, etc. Culture. Remember I showed you culture? That's a family. That's church. Church is still the biggest threat. They attack churches, always. Soviet Union, always. Why? Because if you're like me, or what I try to be, I serve God. I do this because I feel I have responsibility. And I know who I serve, and it ain't the government, and it isn't my pocketbook. I know who I serve. And when you have a population like that, they're absolutely unafraid. That's why they must break the backs of the churches, and they've done that through infiltration. They attack churches, they attack religion, God, Bibles, guns, right? They use the unions, the mass media, universities, political parties, businesses, whatever it takes. Is any of this sounding familiar to you? Now, this was happening in the 1940s. But back around 10 years ago, I talked about what we were seeing in the Obama administration. It looked a whole lot like the 1960s version of the same thing. I just didn't make the connection at the time. In the late 1960s, there was an article published in The Nation by two socialists. Who were these socialist names you've heard before? Richard Andrew Cloward and his wife, Frances Fox Piven. Capitalizing on LBJ's new welfare state, Cloward and Piven launched a new strategy. They used Saul Alinsky's rule of make the enemy live up to their own book of rules. I didn't really understand this like I do today. The welfare state, book of rules. Cloward and Piven decided to launch a campaign to overwhelm and collapse the system through government welfare programs. It involved, quote, a massive drive to recruit the poor onto the welfare rolls. Now, under this strategy, welfare was a Trojan horse to make the entire system crumble down. As more and more people got onto welfare, the state economy would buckle under strain. The welfare state was now being ordered from the top down. But Cloward and Piven proposed a bottom-up movement led by, quote, demonstrations and cadres of aggressive organizers. We got those in spades. When I started talking about Cloward and Piven years ago, it was in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, the massive bailouts, and then the rise of street movements like Occupy Wall Street. Then there was Black Lives Matter, who I believe most think rose after Trump. But no, it was not long after President Obama. When I began talking about this, I was mocked by the mainstream media. They said that I helped trigger death threats on Frances Fox Piven, and she's just a little old lady. Guys, I didn't write the article back in the 1960s. She and her husband did. All I did was restate what they wrote. The Cloward and Piven strategy was so effective that once it was put into motion, it forced New York City into bankruptcy. Test case. Welfare spending pushed New York City to $487 million deficit by 1974. They were forced to borrow $2.2 billion just to keep the lights on. Their outstanding debt was $13.5 billion in the 1970s. It was in the 1990s that Mayor Giuliani addressed what happened. In 1988, he said in a speech, quote, "This wasn't an accident. It wasn't an atmospheric thing. It wasn't supernatural. This is the result of policies and programs designed to have maximum number of people get on welfare. That's not me. I didn't hatch this strategy. That was Cloward and Piven. And collapse is the ultimate goal. The mass media freaked out about me talking about this in 2011. Must be I'm over the target, I thought at the time. Well, lo and behold, Piven's name has just resurfaced after the 2020 election. The New York Times, who called her just a grandmother who's not doing anything anymore, the New York Times said she has become the intellectual guru of activist progressives. What's she been preaching and teaching? Has any of it changed our strategy? Again from the New York Times, quote, "Trying to work within the system is terribly misplaced," Ms. Piven argues, "since it's rigged by elites against the poor. What is needed is a sense of crisis that will force change." Wow. Old dog, or in this case, ancient dog, same old tricks. Kind of interesting how Piven has resurfaced, getting all new media attention just before what some would say is Obama's third term. I mean, the Biden administration, obviously. Overwhelm, collapse, transform. That is the Cloward-Piven strategy, and it's now spread throughout every pillar of American society. And you'll never guess what they targeted after welfare. You'll never guess. Voting.